Get more on our main story. National Audit Office saying the government hasn't explained the business case for a high-speed rail link from London to Birmingham properly, and that there's already a £3 billion funding gap at the heart of the project. Let's speak now to the Rail Minister, Simon Burns, who joins us from Westminster. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
This is turning into a mess, isn't it? What do you make of this criticism?
No, I don't think it is turning into a mess. What I think has happened, because we certainly do not recognise the figures that the NAO have highlighted, what I think has happened is they are reaching conclusions in May 2013 based on a business case from December 2011, 18 months ago, and since then considerable things have moved forward and advanced with the project, like, for example, the announcement by the Secretary of State for Transport for the preferred route for the second phase of the project. That hasn't been taken into account.
Yeah, but forgive me, but at the heart of the criticism, it says the relationship between the savings on journey times and the strategic reasons for doing the project, such as rebalancing regional economies, is unclear. That is at the heart of your argument.
Yes, well, I don't think it is unclear. I think it is patently clear. Journey times are important, but it is not the sole important issue. What is equally important, if not more important, is the capacity that was be released on the conventional lines to be able to ensure that there are more passengers and meeting the demand for more passengers, more freight off our roads and onto the railways. The regeneration, this project is an engine for growth, the job creation, the regeneration, particularly around the stations and the depots, but not exclusively there. The fact that 8 of our 10 largest cities in England will be linked together. It will give greater access for business and passengers to be able to travel faster round the country and on to Europe if they wish to. Those are all important factors.
The benefit-cost ratio calculated for Phase 1 has twice contained errors, and the department has been slow to carry out its own assurances of the underlying analysis, says the report. You're working on flawed assumptions. I mean, are you any clearer that the new figures you have are any better than the last lot?
Yes, because the National Audit Office identified that. We have, due to the management and the checks and balances, we discovered those faults. We then corrected them, and we have moved forward, putting in place mechanisms to minimise that problem. But you have to put it in the context. This is a 20-year project. It is a massive project, and what is important is that we have the mechanisms there to identify if there are any mistakes or fine-tuning needed, and take the necessary action to then do those
you talk about fine-tuning. There is still no real consensus on the route, and in terms of the £3.3 billion funding gap between the two phases, 2018 to 2022, I mean, you're over budget before even 1 metre of track has been laid.
No, because as I said at the beginning of this interview, we do not recognise those figures.
But they're from their own government.
No, they're not from their own government. They are from the National Audit Office, which is an independent body. And as I said, it is based on a business case that is 18 months out of date, and it doesn't take into account developments that have happened since then, like the announcement of the preferred second phase route, and we will be publishing a new business case in the autumn which will put that more in perspective, because it takes into account the moves forward and the changes and the announcements that have been made in that 18-month interval.
So the last business case was wrong, but this next one will be right?
No, the last business case wasn't wrong, but the last business case was relevant 18 months ago and didn't take into account the changes that have happened since then and the moving forward then. For example, the announcement of the preferred route for Phase 2.
All right, going back finally to the heart of this, where is the evidence of the economic benefits that you say are there?
I think the evidence is the workings of the job creation, not only to build the railway, but also through the regeneration.
Yeah, but with respect, if I spent £33 billion tomorrow, I could guarantee creating a few jobs as well.
Yes, of course you could. But what you are asking is what are the benefits of high speed 2, and the aspect that you particularly asked for is the regeneration, and that is what I'm explaining. But it is also going to help communities, particularly where there is problems with unemployment in the north of the country. And if you go to places like Leeds, Manchester, Birmingham, they are very keen on this development because they recognise that it is going to bring economic benefits, just as it has with High Speed 1 through Kent from the Channel to London. There is evidence there. There is evidence around the world where there are high-speed trains, whether it's Japan, France, Germany, that where you have high-speed railways, which are the future, where there are stations and depots, there is significant economic activity and regeneration and job creation and establishment of businesses.
Simon Burns, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Well, let's cross now to our central London studio and talk to Martin Tett, who's Conservative leader of Buckinghamshire County Council, but also chairs the 51 Million Alliance, which is a group of local authorities opposed to the high-speed project. Good morning.
Morning, Carrie.
Your reaction to the National Audit Office report?
It's an absolutely devastating report, quite frankly, for the government. If you look at the key findings, basically it says that the government has been using out-of-date data, inaccurate assumptions, and there are key omissions in the whole business case. What this does is actually prove what we've been saying, and independent analysts have been saying for the last 2 years, that there really is no business case for this. And virtually all the assumptions in terms of economic benefit, closing the north-south divide, are all basically just spin to justify this project.
The CBI have been commenting this morning, and they seem to be broadly, if I understand them correctly, in support of the project, but saying the government needs to make a watertight case. So dissimilar to you, they're just saying they need to look at some angles on this.
Yes, I think you have to read between the lines on the CBI response. I mean, fundamentally, I heard Stephanie Flanders earlier on the Today programme saying it's really hard to find any economist who will actually come out in support of this programme, because it's all about the opportunity cost. What else could you spend? What actually will be nearly £58 billion. 34 billion just buys you the track. If you want to put trains on it, it's going to cost you nearly 58 billion. And that's an eye-watering amount of money. And there can't be a constituency in this country, or an MP, that doesn't have roads that are breaking up, trains that need upgrading, bypasses that need being built, that will give far more economic benefit now when we really need jobs and growth than this political project that won't deliver till 2033.
I want to pick you up on something you said a moment ago about the government using out-of-date data. I mean, they are saying, both in the shape of the Transport Secretary and in the shape of the Rail Minister, who we had on about half an hour ago, that the National Audit Office is using out-of-date data.
Well, and in the famous words, they would say that, wouldn't they? I mean, what the National Audit Office have done is look at the current business case that's published. And, for example, they have taken to task the government's assumption, and about 2/3 of the benefits supposedly of HS2 come from the assumption that businessmen don't work on trains, and that relies on 10-year-old data before the era of mobile phones, iPads, iPods and so on. Now, to say that people don't work on trains is absolutely ludicrous. If you strip that away, and the other points that the National Audit Office pick up, you find that for every pound of taxpayers' money invested in the first stage of this, it actually loses 60 pence. So, you know, that has to be a damning indictment in terms of value for taxpayers' money.
Martin Tett, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, thank you.
Now let's get more on our main news. The National Audit Office report, which says that the economic benefits of the government's high-speed rail link project HS2 are unclear. The government says the report is based on old data. But with me now is Dr. Richard Wellings, Head of Transport at the Institute of Economic Affairs, a free market think tank. Thank you for coming in. Well, you're not a fan of HS2. Tell us why not.
No, well, I think a lot of the economic assumptions used in the business case are deeply flawed, and these have been picked up again by the National Audit Office. So this vindicates a lot of the criticisms that independent economists have had for a long time. And one of those, of course, is that the assumption that business travellers can't do any work on the train, and this is absolutely essential to the business case. It's nonsense, of course. People have got laptops, smartphones, they can look at documents and so on. So people can actually work on the train, and this makes a big dent in the business case.
Dramatically cutting journey times, though, between key cities inevitably makes it more attractive for people to travel between them, doesn't it? And doesn't it then inevitably flow from that they'll be spending money where maybe they wouldn't have done otherwise?
Yes, of course, there are real benefits from reducing travel times. The problem is the enormous cost of HS2. So including all the add-ons, we could be looking at 50 or 60 billion. And of course, this makes a massive difference to the economy. It's a tax bill potentially as high as £2,000 per household. So this will have a really bad negative effect on the economy. And of course, the benefits won't come through for many, many years.
There are other projects which obviously have cost an awful lot of money, and at the time people questioned the value, but over time people use them, they're hugely popular, and the value then goes beyond question. I'm thinking, I suppose, the Channel Tunnel, Jubilee Line extension, other motorway projects. Is it not just important sometimes to kind of forget the figures at the time, but just think of the long-term benefits to the country?
Well, the problem is we focus on the benefits, and we see all the shiny new taxpayer-funded regeneration schemes along the route, and we forget about the businesses that have closed, the jobs that have been lost because of the tax bill for all these projects. So it's a classic example of special interest driving policy.
What was closed, though, do you think, as a result of the costs of this?
Well, it's like any other tax rise. So this massive tax bill is going to close businesses at the margin. So businesses will have to pay a bit more tax. Some of them will close across the country. And of course, the other issue is this good value for money vis-a-vis other transport projects? And even the government's own flawed figures show this is very bad value for money with a very low benefit cost ratio. So if the government's going to invest in transport, there are much better schemes, often local bog standard schemes like bypasses that would deliver much bigger returns. I mean,
obviously, as you say, the cost is high. You say it would have a negative impact on jobs. The government says investing in infrastructure is inevitably good for jobs. It creates jobs, just the project itself.
I mean, the evidence is very weak on that. We have a good example in the UK, in Doncaster, which has had a fast rail link for over 30 years now. It's only 90 minutes from London, but it remains one of the poorest towns in the UK. It's no richer than any other boroughs in the north of England nearby. So the evidence is very weak on that. And we could also look to places like Spain, where they've actually had to cut services because they're uneconomic and there's no regeneration evidence.
Dr. Richard Wellings, thank you very much.
We will continue that debate with a man you may know is a rail enthusiast. You would know him as well as one of our most successful music producers. A very good afternoon to Pete Waterman. Hello to you.
Afternoon.
The NAO then says it's just not clear how this could deliver and rebalance economic growth. What do you make of that assessment?
Predictable. I mean, you know, I was on this programme at the very beginning of this and said there is no economic case for a high-speed railway. There has never been an economic case for a railway. So the more that people sit with beans trying to work out where the middle is, you go farther away from it. Nobody can actually quantify what this will mean. We have just seen, history tells us, when we speed up and build new rail services, we open up the country. That's history. They can't deny that. What it will do in the next 30 years, none of us will, you know, none of us, well, I won't be alive to tell you, but, you know, we always know that railway projects of this enormity have changed the face of the world, always. And they don't change it slightly, they change it massively.
Because I mean, your point is that, what, you're opening up developing towns along the route that would otherwise not have the investment, that sort of thing?
Well, it is, except what you do is you're taking pressure off the network as it exists now. I mean, we have the West Coast Main Line, for instance, where this week we've had 2-hour delays because the system hasn't had real investment for 60 years. It's packed. It's burst into capacity. And I keep saying to people, imagine getting an Austin 7, all of those that are old enough to remember Austin 7s, and saying, go to Leeds every day in an Austin 7. You wouldn't even consider it. Yet some of our trains were built in 1963. It is bizarre, and we can't go on anymore. And all the arguments, and of course it's devastating. Of course it's a massive upheaval. But at some point you have to bite the bullet and say, we must modernise for the future. And people like us with grey hair, we will never see it. But we have to think of our great-grandchildren and our great-grandchildren.
Yeah, I mean, you paint a wonderful historical picture. Just in relation to this, I wonder, there does seem to be an awful lot of focus with this all the time on speed, the time it takes to travel between London and Birmingham, for example, phase 1. Actually, isn't Britain's rail problem really about capacity, not journey times?
Well, it is, but we can't. Unfortunately, railways are a little bit strange in that speed matters. And even back to 1933, when they put the Flying Scotsman on, and they charged a premium fare for people going from London to Edinburgh faster, it works. So by putting a high-speed train on, you take some of those passengers off the main routes and you get more capacity. It's the only way.
Always good to talk to you. I imagine we will be debating this again, but thank you very much for now.
I think this will go on for a while yet.
I think so. Don't move far away. Thank you very much, Pete Waterman. Thanks for being with us. Thank you. Let's go to Coventry now and talk to Joe Rukin, because he's campaign manager of Stop HS2. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Jane.
I guess you must be rather pleased with what the NAO is saying.
Well, absolutely. The National Audit Office is saying pretty much what we've been saying for the last 3 years, that the government is falsifying the case for HS2. They've used 12-year-old data to come up with £12 billion worth of benefits for HS2 by saying that no one works on trains whatsoever. So if you've ever seen someone tapping away on a laptop on a train, you're wrong. Doesn't happen as far as the case for HS2 is concerned. But the real thing that you've got to look at in this report is just how much the cost is concerned. They're saying that there's a £3.3 billion black hole, but what the National Audit Office is very clear about is you've got to add that to the initial construction cost, you've got to add that to the cost of the trains, which is always missed out when people talk about the cost of the project. That brings you up to £44 billion. But the other thing that they're saying is that the Department for Transport, HS2 Limited, have never added the VAT on. And we've been saying this for 3 years. The VAT's got to go on that. And HS2 Limited have said, no, we don't have to pay that. And the National Audit Office come back, yes you do, and you probably can't reclaim it. That puts the cost of this project at £53 billion, and that is just a price that this country cannot afford.
Well, the Transport Secretary, of course, rejects some of the figures in the report. He also says, though, we're doing this to make Britain a stronger and a more prosperous place. I appreciate you're bringing out the financial implications, but things come from that. Cities grow. There is more prosperity in the places that the train line would go through. Do you not recognise any of that?
Well, the problem is that the Transport Secretary is caught in a time warp. He's saying, oh, railways cause prosperity. Yeah, well, that was when the original railways were built, when they were taking over from canal barges and horse and carts. What you've got to realise is that there are already railways that are doing the journeys that are concerned. The National Audit Office, again, was very, very clear that rail growth has increased, that rail usage has increased, but has it increased between the places that the government actually want to build HS2? London to Birmingham. Is that actually needing more capacity? What all the studies show, and the National Audit Office again say, it's the suburban routes, it's the commuter routes, it's the shorter routes that are really facing crush hour conditions, and that's where we should be spending money.
So take, even though it's money we don't have, is what you're partly arguing, I think, at least take some of the money and put it on other lines?
Well, no, that's the thing. You can spend far less money and deliver more benefits more quickly, more for less money, and deliver those benefits to more people. Like, again, the NAO report looks at the 51M alternative, and that would deliver a benefit cost ratio 4 times greater than HS2 for a quarter of the cost, and that delivers the benefits across the network. Like, I'm sat here in Coventry. Coventry is a great example of somewhere that will lose out with HS2. Coventry has 3 trains an hour to London at the moment, and 3 fast trains an hour to Birmingham at the moment, and that's because it's part of the Birmingham to London service. You take Birmingham to London, stick it on high-speed rail, you can't justify 3 trains an hour from Coventry to London. So they'll lose those services, and not only lose the service to London, but lose the service to Birmingham, the fast trains to Birmingham, which they're probably more dependent on for the local economy, and that is just wrong. And cities like Derby and Nottingham in the city centre, Chesterfield, Stoke, Stafford, they're all going to face similar cuts because, again, the National Audit Office report says £3 billion worth of cuts to the existing railway network has to happen just for stage 1, and when you open that up to stage 1 going up to Manchester and Leeds, that is £7 billion worth of cuts from the existing transport network has to happen to pay for HS2.
Very interesting to talk to you. Thanks for now. Joe Rukin from Stop HS2. Thank you.